Environmentalists, financiers, corporations, and indigenous communities often speak very different languages. So how can we put everyone on the same page when the conversation is about environmental protection and biodiversity restoration? And can technology help align their interests? For possible answers to these questions, we welcome back Ryan Sarsfield, Senior Advisor for Biodiversity Markets at the Environmental Policy Innovation Center, speaking to us from Washington, D.C. Ryan, globally, we're starting to see both voluntary and mandatory schemes emerge as relates to biodiversity credits. Are either of those kinds more effective at convincing companies, at making companies care about restoring our ecosystems? And going forward, do we need more regulation or more incentives or both?
I think, if it's a carrot or a stick, both can be useful. We know from experience that a regulatory market can create consistent demand. And with consistent demand, you can have investment, you can have a lot more money flowing into conservation. So we think that's a good option. This is something the U.S. has done for decades now, having some of our ecosystems protected in such a way that require offsetting in some cases, wetlands and streams, some endangered species. And those markets would probably be much smaller if we did not have this regulatory structure. England just launched Biodiversity Net Gain last year, which has been a really striking example and a very ambitious example of how far you can go to ensure that the country as a whole aims for a no net loss of ecosystems. Colombia, likewise, has a really interesting regulatory system. So we have examples that we know that work. We know that the demand will be strong, and we think that's a fantastic way to go about it. So we support that. On the other hand, companies are more interested in biodiversity now than ever, and not just in investing in ways that they traditionally have, either by donating to a conservation organization or by planting trees, for example. But the idea now is to measure biodiversity impact more consistently. We have these disclosure processes that are encouraging that, and investors in those companies, financiers, are encouraging them and sometimes requiring them to keep track of their biodiversity impacts because that has become material to do. So over time, we think that, much like climate, they will move from disclosure and into action, and we will start to approach biodiversity management from a corporate perspective a little bit more like accounting. So where are they creating impacts? Where are they avoiding impacts? And where are they investing in, for instance, offsets that can help them basically compensate where they have made those impacts? And they're doing this for a variety of reasons, even though it's voluntary. One is this disclosure process I just mentioned. Two being that often their businesses depend on it because the businesses rely on pollination, if it's agriculture, for example, or water provision, or all these other ecosystem services. And because being a good corporate citizen, I think, requires good care of the environment. So this goes by different names in different places, ESG, corporate and social responsibility. But I think we're moving towards an era where it's simply not an option for companies to destroy nature without thinking twice. But there's trade-offs to be made, and I think over time they're going to be more interested in investing in biodiversity through things like credits.
Well, voluntary or not, creating environmental incentives is often about winning the finance department. So we spoke to Professor Tsai Ming-Jer, director of the National Taiwan University Experimental Forest, who told us how NTU could persuade two major financial institutions in Taiwan, Isan Bank and Cathay Financial Holdings, to support Taiwan's first biodiversity credit scheme. Take a listen.
那企业要投资在一个事情的时候，他一定审慎评估，他可不可以获利，对不对？最重要的，他需要那个透明度，那个透明度让他相信他真正的投到正确的事情里面来。所以在这里呢，科学研究就扮演一个非常重要的角色。那一旦这个科研能够透明，能够让他知道说我投入这样的一个金钱以后，能够产生真正的多少的 net gain 生物多样性的一个正成长的话，那他就容易这个来做这个事情。他甚至也可以率先当 early adapter 来做这个事情，而且应用这种智慧科技，包括 AI 等等可以更为精准的来告诉我们生物 多样性的一个变动。我们也跟一些上市公司有合作比如说在研究我们雾林带的雾到底为什么有这样的变化。溪头的雾是很漂亮的你可以到下午可以看到那个雾非常非常的美，就好像仙境一样。但是这几年来你会看见这些雾都散掉了。那为什么会散掉呢？就是因为气候变迁，它的温度稍微高了一点。那这个东西我们有一些相关的一个监测的仪器可以来做这个，还有包括我们比如说对于鸟类，我们过去对于鸟类的研究里面，在深山里面，我们顶多可以装一个摄影机，然后我们固定一个时间去把这个摄影机里面的一个录下来的影像把它带回去。但是现在可以 real time 就是可以应用一些科技呢，把这个现场录到的东西传输到中继站，然后再传送到我们的库房里面、机房里面去，那更能精确的来告诉我们说大概有多少的鸟种，或者是有多少的量在这里活动
Professor Tsai talked about technology improving accountability and transparency in biodiversity credits. How helpful is that in convincing companies or buyers of biodiversity credits to invest in ecological restoration? This kind of increased level of real-time data and real-time accountability.
I think it's fantastic. I had the experience a couple decades ago of working in field research on birds, and I would spend hours every day with an antenna tracking birds. So we are going through this revolution, AI, technology to identify species, things that help identify species in the field, and sounds and eDNA. There's an incredible change. And that, I think, together with the transparency that Professor Tsai talked about, it's really powerful. We think of investments in biodiversity not just for their symbolic value. We want to know that we're helping tiger habitat or this coral reef, for example, but we want data to show that that is actually happening. And I think the more data we can collect with this new technology, we can not only strengthen the case and show people what's happening, but it gets legitimized. And this helps companies make claims and show what they're actually doing out in the real world. And I think critically, it helps reduce the price. We can speed up how things work. We can make it less costly to collect more and better data. I think that's fantastic. And like any industry, the more investment that goes into it, the more we can get out of it.
Well, even with these advanced techniques, a lot of conservation efforts rely on local labor and working with local communities. Now, your organization is currently working with Assiniboine and Sioux tribes of Fort Peck to bring back the buffalo to tribal lands. What has that experience taught you in how restoration works in the current day and age?
Well, I can't say it's been a surprise, but I am reminded in working with the Assiniboine and Sioux tribe just how much they are the experts. They know how to manage the herd of buffalo. They currently manage a herd, and the idea with this project is to expand that to, as I said, with biodiversity credits in general, we want to have better measurement. We want to show how these ecological changes happen. And who knows better to do that than the tribes themselves, who have been living in these areas and managing these ecosystems since time immemorial. So I think, in working with local communities, it's, anybody who works on policy like myself, we're never really surprised, right? You find that the local knowledge is best and they know how to manage their own resources. And I think through tools like a biodiversity credit, you can support that management and reward that really necessary work that's already happening.
Well, we could say that biodiversity credits are, simply put, about pricing nature and trading it on the market. Once again, here's Professor Tsai Ming-Jer from National Taiwan University telling us how this business model is taking shape.
因为我从这3届去 COP 演讲以后回来，接受到的这个接触非常非常的多那最近也在很多的金融公司不是上班在金融公司里面演讲，表示他们对这个真的非常有兴趣，而且现在已经走到 finance。你今天不谈 finance， 很多企业有可能都是心不甘情不愿。但是如果有 finance 的话，它又能够做很好的 ESG， 又能够让公司的财务有一个交代我不要说赚钱了，又有个交代那这样做起来会非常的愉快尤其现在的商模渐渐的出来。我在看这个世界经济论坛里面，已经有10种商模已经出来了包括像债券或者是你听过的像比如说犀牛债券或者是森林覆盖率的债券或水质的债券等等比如说我们要保护这里的水质，那水质变好的时候，债券的一个价值就提高。我们要保护这里的犀牛的数目多的时候，它就价值就会提高。我相信国内的这个金融机构已经在规划很多的相关的债券，或者是这种有利于促进自然保育的一个商模已经在规划了。我从这个很多的这个企业在问我这些事情，我就知道他们已经在秘密的在规划这个，现在在比谁快，谁的方案好。
Now, Ryan, since finances seem to be very important for this whole thing to work, can you tell us how these biodiversity credits maintain their value? Because intuitively, one might think that with better environments, with better ecosystems, with more improvement, more birds, more tigers, more endangered species, the scarcity would go down. So what happens to these credits over a period of time after, let's say, a company decides to invest in them?
It's interesting. There's a lot of different financial structures out there. Bonds is one of them. There's been a lot of innovation in that area. They're structured, differently than a typical bond, but we know there's a lot of interest in bonds that have an environmental benefit. So I think that's a good trend. Now, biodiversity credits, on the other hand, they shouldn't really be seen as a security or a bond or something that you have a share in. The value over time of credits, because they're not something that's accumulated and traded the way that a share of a corporation might be or a bond might be. Instead, it's something that is created. It represents the change in the ecosystem critically. And we want that change to be paid for at the time, but the credit itself represents the long-term management and the protection of that ecosystem. So the real value there is the ecosystem services that are preserved for the next, we would like to see a minimum of 30 years, perhaps even longer. So when a credit is purchased, the credit itself, we might say that it's retired in an equivalent sense to a carbon credit. It generally is not going to be traded further than that. Or hoarded or accumulated. We don't want to see credit billionaires out there. But having the value of those ecosystems preserved for the next 30, 40, 50 years or in perpetuity, that's where the value lies, because we have the birds and mammals and trees and ecosystem services like water provision and climate services and all the other things that these ecosystems do for us apart from their natural beauty, which we appreciate as well. So that's where the real value lies.
Well, besides preserving our ecosystems for the next 30, 40, 50 years, how do you see the biodiversity credit system develop over the coming years and decades, both in itself and also how it relates to other elements of the ecological economy?
So with climate, it's interesting. If we're successful with our work on climate change, and I sure hope we are, we might find that 40, 50, 60, maybe longer from now, we will make real progress on it, and we can start to choose a new path. With biodiversity, we're talking about resource use. We're talking about land use and how we use our oceans and our coasts. And there will always be trade-offs. These are trade-offs that we can never avoid. So we want to have, for the very long term of our ecosystems and humanity, we want to balance these correctly. I think by investing in them, treating them as valuable as they really are, I think is the way to do that. But we're never not going to have to treat these trade-offs as a complicated question, right? So this is a question we have to deal with now. And I think over the next few years, it's only going to become more salient as corporates start to recognize both this trend in needing to account for their nature impacts and the need to invest in it in a way that's systematic, that's measured, that of course is trustworthy and transparent, as Professor Tsai said. And we just see this as a one-way street, and we're going to have to get better and better at it, and I think we will.